Um, so, well, as you may know, my name is Jeremy Lent, and I'm really happy to welcome you to today's live interactive conversation with my dear friend and amazing systems thinker and change maker, Daniel Christian Wahl. Our title for this conversation is Envisioning an Ecological Civilization of Diverse Regenerative Cultures. So just by way of a little bit of context setting, I think most of us here today probably share some core perceptions really about what's going on in the world around us. Perceptions which may be very different from what our mainstream culture tells us, right? You'll probably agree to some degree or other that this civilization right now is on a bad trajectory of climate breakdown and ecological disaster and just grotesque inequality. And that you might be sharing the fear that potentially this could be leading to collapse. And maybe you've been drawn to the Deep Transformation Network or to Daniel's work or perhaps my work because you believe that an alternative trajectory toward a regenerative future in harmony with Earth is actually possible, but maybe requires a real transformation of our current world. And so the key question is, and what I'm really looking forward to discussing with Daniel today is, what might that look like? And maybe equally importantly, what steps can we take right now to lead us toward a life-affirming future? So our format today, our session lasts for about 75 minutes. The first half hour, I'll be in conversation with Daniel. But clearly, the ideas and solutions and thoughts arising from these questions are for all of us to co-create together. So in the second half, we'll be inviting you to join the conversation with your reflections and your questions and perspectives. And even in that first half, while I'm speaking with Daniel, if you want to add a link or something came to you that you felt was really strong, you wanted to kind of make a note for yourself, but you wanted to share it with others, then feel free to put that in the chat so that we can really start to sort of co-create that together, like a mycelial network sort of thing under the ground. So feel free to use it in that way if you choose. And so just by way of my own personal context, I first came across Daniel through his book, through that great classic, Designing Regenerative Cultures. When I was in an exploratory phase in my life some years back, trying to figure out how to apply like a life-affirming systems-based understanding of the world for optimal impact. And well, what a discovery it was. And I was so struck by the breadth of what Daniel's book offered. And since then, I've had the pleasure to come to know Daniel personally as a friend and been impressed not just by his breadth of knowledge, but his depth of understanding and the way he's devoted his life to his values. So welcome, Daniel, to this conversation, and welcome to the Deep Transformation. It's so great to see your face here, have you join us here in this virtual space together.
And thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this evening, and it's wonderful to see how many people are joining us.
Yeah. And so glad that we have a chance to kind of just share conversations that we've had together more intimately, but in a more public space that people can join along with us. And if I could, I just kind of wanted to ask you, because it's so sort of on top of my own head right now, and probably for most of us here, just we're feeling into this horrendous stuff happening in the world around us right now, this terrible violence in Israel, Gaza, and the way that's causing so much more extreme polarization around the world. And probably most people like me have been watching this tragic farce of COP28 in Dubai, where, you know, basically the most important global process around climate breakdown is essentially turning into a trade fair for the fossil fuel industry, right? And I just like to start off just asking you, Daniel, just how are you feeling about things right now? How are you handling all this going on? How are you relating to it and processing it?
A lot better than I have been at points over the last 2 or 3 years. Like the last 2 or 3 years have been a bit of a ride of repeatedly being disappointed by patterns re-emerging that I thought we'd left in the last century,
Mm,
politically, and like this whole rise of the cancel culture and the split that happened in networks and even within tribes over the different COVID perspectives and all of that. But right now, I must say I've decided to really draw back to the scale where my actions actually can have an impact. And so, like for example, as you were reflecting on COP28, I just noticed how blissfully uninformed I am about anything that has been going on with COP28 because it's just like I'm often reminded of my friend May East has this beautiful redefinition for me of what it means to be an activist.
mhm,
And she says that because often activist is a sort of misunderstood as a fighting against something.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
And I never really aligned with that energy. But she said for her activism is to wake up every morning and after your morning meditation ask yourself the question, what do I want to activate with the power of my attention and my intention today?
mhm.
Um, that's what I'm trying to live more and more. And so if I put my attention at COP28 and how dysfunctional that process is, I'm just spinning my wheels basically. Everybody else is doing that too. So I right now, like today, I planted 2 olive trees,
Mm.
um, and that quite literally keeps me grounded. To like ever since I started this close, intimate relationship with a piece of land, it's given me an anchor that I'm also exploring with regard to the significance of my work in the world.
I love that, Daniel. And what's going through my mind as I'm hearing that is two different like voices within my own mind. And one of the things I love most about you and your work and your whole approach is that place of handling complexity. So what I'd like to do is put both of those voices out there, and then let's kind of explore together like how do those voices get reconciled or sort of both honored. So one voice is like so aligned with everything you're saying, and it seems so skillful and so wise that right when like we don't like try to attack the bad things because that just causes more conflict, more resistance, exhausts us, and ends up maybe even if we win something, it might even lead to more polarization and like net be a Pyrrhic victory anyway. Totally makes sense to me. And along those lines, there's that quote that I know from that great systems thinker Ilya Prigogine, talking about like transformative change and talking about how when a system is transforming from one coherent system to another, and it goes through this period of chaos, you have these islands of coherence arising in a sea of chaos. Such a beautiful, poetic, and scientifically deep, profound understanding. And so it's like, yes, let's put our energy into those islands of coherence and rise them. So totally with you. And in fact, really, most of my life is lived in that. So I'm really there. And the other voice goes in me. And what about the people who aren't in a place where they have that luxury? What about the people who aren't able to have their own peaceful piece of land where they can plant olive trees and where and those there's often this kind of phrase like tend your garden, but what about the people who don't have gardens and the ones and in the meantime, if we let those fossil fuel companies just do their thing without resistance, then they'll just trounce us all, and then our basically our olive trees, the gardens, and everything else will just get encroached on. So there has to be a space somehow for that pushback and that total active sort of classic activist engagement as well as that. And I don't know how to hold those together. And so I'd love to hear your
No,
perspectives on that.
yeah, that's the tension where we live in. I mean, for me, the trying to work on one end of the spectrum with the meta design of the narratives and the frameworks and the organizing ideas that we tell ourselves about the world, who we are, what perception is, what consciousness is, all those really big questions actually can inform how we then show up in the world. And so part of me is working in that sphere. Then on the other end, I'm end of the extreme. I'm planting 2 olive trees on a little bit over half a hectare, and like those being two more of about 300 trees that I've planted here in the last 3 years. But in between, for me, it's right now primarily about human relationships, about relationships on the local and regional scale, um, working with more and more actors in my part of the world,
Mm-hmm.
where the same kind of inequalities show up that you rightly point out, and I'm daily um, aware of my own privilege
Mm-hmm.
and daily giving thanks for it, and daily in this asking the question, what do I activate the power of my attention and intention? Also feeling a responsibility of being in service to something other because of the privilege I have.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I kind of got out of the sort of like privilege is like rank. You can't really take it off. It's not a coat that you can just sort of leave at the door. And so it's more about how to use it. Um,
Yeah.
and so for me, you addressed earlier the clear and present danger of cascading systems collapse that were really from one perspective already in the middle of rather than facing. And particularly when you look at it in this equality lens, the whole conversation about are we in collapse? Will there be a collapse? Is a privileged conversation. There are already billions of people or hundreds of millions of people that would have a very clear answer to that. So for me, I think it's really important that we work on what is ultimately invisible, not new cities, new buildings, but new relationships to each other in place, new capacities
Mm-hmm.
to um, ask, and what next?
Mm-hmm.
And includes a lot of humility with regard to holding on to the system that we've grown accustomed to and understanding that we'll probably have to let go of more than we think we will have to let go and that it will be uncomfortable.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, love that, Daniel. Thanks. And you know, as you were talking, what was coming into my mind um, was actually the three horizons model of change, which I have to say that is one of the things that I'm most grateful to your work for. The first time I came across the three horizons model of change was in your book, and I totally absorbed that and went and read other articles you've written about it, and then sort of more source material. And when I give coursework or talks often, that's a fundamental thing that I talk through, because I just think it's maybe the most skillful, the most valuable model of thinking about how we move towards change. And I'm wondering, perhaps to begin with, for people who haven't actually come across that model, do you want to just give just a real high level summary of what that model is? And then maybe we can just explore how that model works in relation to what we've just been describing.
Yeah, maybe I'll give a bit of background. So I, in 2000 and when was it, 9, I was in running Findhorn College in the Eco Village in northern Scotland at the Findhorn Eco Village. And I was also working with a United Nations Institute of Training and Research Training Center, CFAL Scotland. And we're running these seminars on sustainability, bringing public authority, local business actors and universities together in these seminars. And through that, I met Tony Hodgson,
Mm-hmm.
who is one of the driving forces behind the International Futures Forum, and who really is the one who had the sort of deeper cognitive way of rewiring the way we think, training that informed Bill Sharp to create the Three Horizons and
Ah,
other things. Like also there's the World Systems Map. And so the Three Horizons evolved in a collaboration between Bill Sharp, Tony Hodgson, and to some extent, what was this futurist? There's another name that I'm spacing on right now. Um, and the way people think about them now, because Bill has done great work in taking them out there. Like he's worked with future stewards, trained up lots of people in the COP25, I think it was in Glasgow. In the run up to that, there was a lot of different industry leaders were trained up in Three Horizon thinking. But I have observed that unfortunately, um, it's a shallow version of the model.
uh-huh.
So the shallow version, which is still useful, which is um, the first horizon is business as usual. The
Mm-hmm.
third horizon is the transformative world of diverse regenerative cultures creating an ecological civilization. And in the middle horizon, which is the sort of turbulent transition from one to the other, you have the space of the innovator, the entrepreneur. Um, and so that's already showing that it's not just three spaces in time, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also three roles, because the
Yeah.
first horizon is the role of um, the political leader or the company CEO, was ultimately responsible for people staying in jobs and for whatever, the company not going bankrupt and all of that. So it's very immediate focus, first horizon work that
Yeah.
is necessary. And then there's the visionary work, and then there's the entrepreneur that is saying, okay, all these visions are fine, but what are the already existing technological or other systems steps that we can take to create that future?
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is extremely useful. But I think what is the most powerful and often um, undervalued or underrepresented part of this model
Mm-hmm.
is that we can also understand these three horizons as three perspectives that we can take onto the future from the present.
Mm. Mm.
And that if we do that, then suddenly all the opinions on the spectrum
Yeah.
are valuable because they come from a certain perspective with a certain set of needs and a certain, like in terms of um, Nora Bateson's work and the kind of double bind, like the double bind
Mm-hmm.
comes about when two different contexts collide and you can't solve them
Yeah,
at
you,
one
you
at the
can't
same
write
time.
it down,
Yeah.
put it together,
And
integrate.
so in this way, we're just putting into the room um, three different contexts: the context of the entrepreneur, the context
Yeah.
of the business manager, or and the context of the visionary who sees this system is bound to fail if it continues. We need to transform it.
Yeah.
And the key of the facilitating well with this framework is
Mm-hmm.
to bring the diversity of actors into the room and bring them out of the closed mindset of each role, because each one of those actors will be in a specific role from whatever they do, and therefore have a predisposition to associate themselves with one of the three horizons.
Yes.
And what you really want to do is you bring them into a space where they, rather than be closed mindset and arguing against each other, they're open mindset
Yeah.
and they're looking at the spectrum. And then and this is the most important bit, which we could go into a bit more deeper, is this beautiful concept that Tony created, which is the future potential of the present moment. And
Mm.
that's what you're
Yeah.
working when you work with the three
Yeah.
horizons.
Yeah, love that. And that to me is what I picked up as why I think that model is so valuable, because so much of the time in the sort of progressive world in general, you have people fighting against each other rather than fighting again or trying to transform the system. It's like, no, you're too short term, or you're missing the big picture, or oh, you're too idealistic. And as you point out when you write about it, this enables us to look at how we're all part of this system towards transformative change. And I love the kind of metaphor of like on ramps, if you will. It's like, so if you're in Horizon 1, that can be great as long as you're kind of orienting towards what can lead more naturally to Horizon 2. And if you're in Horizon 2, what can lead more naturally to Horizon 3? So there is a sense, and the metaphor of journey makes sense. Like if you're walking, there's no point in tripping up. You need to be on Horizon 1 every moment as you're stepping, so you're stepping the right way. And Horizon 2 can look really good, but if it's moving you away from Horizon 3, like a sort of false climate solution or whatever, Horizon 2 might be climate, carbon capture and storage. Somebody could say, yeah, that's Horizon 2, that's transformative thinking within but it's leading you away from that third horizon. And so then it begins to sort of inform everyone's work. So I was thinking about the whole notion of activism in the traditional sense of fighting against. Well, in a way, that is like it's being in Horizon 1, but fighting to try to make something move towards a different horizon, right?
Well,
Or,
the thing that I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that, because it's something that I'm more and more sort of growing into in my own
yeah,
perspective. And I think it's been triggered through a number of conversations like I've have these wonderful conversations, like conversations with you.
yeah.
Um, and um, I think that part of it comes from talking with Nora as well, with Nora Bateson. This question of the notion of the change maker
Okay.
and the notion of we have a responsibility, we need to tweak the system, the systems designer. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Um, and how wedded it is to a notion of the future that is always not here, that is
Right.
always somewhere in the future. And how even the transition meme that we like, Joanna Macy, the Great Transition, you with the Transition Network, Transition Towns, also creates the kind of how do we get from this mess we're in to
Yeah.
this viable future we want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm starting to wonder, particularly the more you look at the signs of where we're at and what's coming, is maybe we've got it the wrong way around. Maybe at this phase of transformative change in human affairs, we're not going to make the change. Or actually, let's put it that way, some of us have created actions that have created patterns of which we will now live through the age of consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But our change-making capacity
Mm-hmm.
is actually limited. At best, we have an ability to respond, a response ability to these changes that are now coming at us. And in a similar way, I had a conversation with Satish Kumar about this collapse conversation and how to be optimistic when everything looks so grim. And Satish, in his sort of slightly oversimplifying things to the point that it feels naive, but then actually says something really meaningful and important, said, bring on the collapse, let it collapse faster, it needs to collapse. And to some extent, I think there are structures that are now so um, degenerative and structurally violent that they can only dissolve to make room for new ways of being. And
Yeah.
so yeah, and that's
So
is why I'm so on.
I hear what you're saying about that, but I have a visceral reaction against that kind of invitation, bring on the collapse kind of thing. And I've heard so many different people in different
Mhm.
contexts, basically say that. And I recognize the truth in that, in the terms of like the system. And by the way, my preference is the word transformation rather than
one tip to get
Oh,
over a
I
breakup, and
think we have a little bit of a, photo bomb there. My preference is for the concept of transformation rather than transition, because I feel transformation captures the notion of the entire system has to be like recohered or whatever. But what my problem is with the bring on the collapse kind of meme, if you will, or whatever, is that I think oftentimes people may miss, at least my senses, and people like Thomas Homer Dixon, other people I really respect, said similar things, that if a collapse happens, this whole system is so incredibly precarious. It's not just like a little collapse and like, oh, and then we'll all kind of reorient. And we're talking about ultimately the greatest disaster, the greatest suffering, like collective suffering of human beings that's ever happened in all history. We're talking about mega deaths. We're talking about loss of any of the kind of infrastructures, both positive and negative, but including the positive ones that have been created that allow us to have a, a global connection, allow us to talk to each other in different parts of the world, all this kind of stuff right now, and potentially could lead to untold millennia then in the future of more like agrarian, hierarchical, slave-driven civilizations with, so pretty awful in almost any way you look at it. So to me, the greatest challenge is basically, how do you transform our society as it unravels? And that's why I love Joanna Mesa's unraveling metaphor, because it's like, if you think of it like a rug unraveling, well, as it unravels, the degrees of freedom to reweave it open up before it's completely gone. So, and to me, that defines what the challenge is for our generation and the next generation, is to somehow, it's almost like, it needs almost like miraculous to actually make it happen. But it's the only way I can see that positive scenario is if we can actually reweave how our entire society is working as it's unraveling, but before it's completely collapsed.
Absolutely. And I agree with you, and I have the same visceral reaction of saying, I've observed this with most presidents that are worth being called presidents of in the country that you live in. When they get into office, they're full of beans trying to change, like wanting to change the world, and then they 4 weeks later, they look like beaten dogs. It looks like somebody's taken them into the back room and told them something about how the system really works that makes them realize, fuck, I thought I could now really do something, and they realize they can't. And I think the biggest realization that comes is that somebody actually stubs them into the face of what system collapse would look like, what happens when the economy stops growing, and that we're in this system that we built, that we need to double our economies every 24 years, or the whole card house crumbles. And unfortunately, that's probably what is nevertheless going to happen. But I'm with you with regard to how do we rearrange things as they crumble rather than let them all fall on the ground. And that for me is something that, as I was planting the olive tree today, this is completely new, because I was sort of musing on our conversation, and this thought came to me that there's this way of thinking about the future, which is about envisioning the future. And you can say that because we always have this beautiful dance between the kind of two ends of the spectrum, from diverse regenerative cultures, local place-based, to the big global civilization, ecological civilization.
Exactly.
And in many ways, if you look at that spectrum, one end is the envisioning the future. And with the envisioning the future comes that trajectory of like, we need a transition. It comes the whole, like, let's envision the future and then backcast, and what are the key steps to get there. It becomes a little bit engineering. How do we engineer ourselves to get into that future? And then there's another way of working with future, which is very much related to where we ended when we talked about the three horizons, the future potential of the present moment. And that's the enacting the future now. Enacting the future now. And if you think about it, the future is a concept. The past is a concept. Both of them come to us through the act of being in the now and trying to make sense of it. And so the only way we can ever really act is in the present. And that's why I'm leaning towards the more local and the more place source, place drawn, local culture drawn, re-inhabiting the planet,
Yeah.
re-inhabiting places, re-inhabiting bioregions, and
Hmm.
enacting our own capacity of being regenerative expressions of place, which we do have. Otherwise, we wouldn't have evolved to the point that we could have this conversation right now.
Yeah.
The very fact that we're still here means that our ancestors have been regenerative expressions of place, of the bioregions and ecosystems that brought them forth. And
Yeah.
they have been gardeners of abundance, custodians of diversity, and actually shaped
Hmm.
the abundance that we inherited. And so for me, I don't know, trying
That's
this on,
great, Daniel.
enacting the future rather than envisioning the future. I would love to hear
Yeah.
your take on
No,
that.
it makes absolute sense. And I see Jürgen Nagler put in the chat exactly what's coming to my mind. As you were speaking about that, I was thinking of Otto Scharmer's phrase, which is another one that I just love, of living into the emerging future, like essentially um, becoming, acting as if you're already in that life-affirming civilization. And everything you do is actually creating that future by being, um, by enacting the very thing that you want to see happen, by essentially being present with it. But in fact, that leads me, Daniel, to, and you were mentioning it, and I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure we open to other people.
Yeah.
So we can really have, as premised, like a full generative conversation with our whole community. But I did want to make sure we touched on this very interesting topic about the difference between our perspectives. Like we share so much in terms of our sense of the kinds of systems thinking or life affirming futures we look at. But so just for way of perspective, for other people, Daniel and I were actually meeting up in this summit in Bristol, Local Futures, just a couple of months ago. Hadn't seen Daniel for a while, and we started chatting. And you said something to me like, I can't remember the exact words, but it was like, I got to tell you, even though I love everything you say when you talk about ecological civilization, I hate that term. And I was a bit taken aback. And then we got to talk more about it. And specifically, just for people who don't have that sort of context of what I often talk about, just very, very high level. A lot of my work right now, I'm writing a book on it, and I give talks about it, is about envisioning basically a fundamentally different kind of civilization, a life-affirming civilization, changing the entire operating system of the civilization. And it's not my term, but I have very much absorbed and digested this term that's used around the world of an ecological civilization. And so fundamentally, the vision is, what would it look like if every single aspect of our entire civilization was transformed? So rather than being built on extraction, exploitation, it was actually built on setting the conditions for life to thrive in all the different ways that are possible, every domain of civilization. So that's just kind of a summary. But why don't you, Daniel, just for everyone's benefit, just summarize what you don't like about. I mean, because we assume that we kind of have agreement on, on some of the positive elements there. So
It's just um, I think it would be a mistake to even suggest that we're in disagreement. It's because we're not. But again, it's a it's a spectrum,
right.
and the only maybe where we are in disagreement is what is skillful means
Mm-hmm.
or the right meme to enter with in order to
Yes.
nudge the cognitive framing for people of how to get active.
Yeah.
My take is that if you come into the meme ecological civilization, which I understand you want people to kind of go, we can do this.
Yeah.
We as the big we of humanity, but we know that the big we of humanity has eluded us in many ways when you look at the detail. You talked about Israel, Palestine just
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning. Um, and so I think the big we is reached through a way of celebrating the uniqueness of the diversity of what makes up that we. And therefore, I think in engaging the local and regional place-sourced regenerative culture, singular in one place, plural across the world in all places, um, is actually the pathway. And when you talk about what the vision of ecological civilization would look like, it is that decentralized, much more
Yes.
place-based, coming home to place and region world. And like in my academic work ages ago, when I did my PhD in 2006 on design for human and planetary health, I used this notion of scales of design that actually the guy who runs the Buckminster Fuller Institute right now, Stuart Cohen, wrote a book with Zim van der Rin called Ecological Design in the 1990s. And in that, they talked about something called scale linking design, which I think we don't pay enough attention to. Because it shows how product design, architecture, community planning, city planning, industrial ecologies, or all of those scales are nested within a regional scale. So pretty much most of the design things can actually be dealt with within a regional context. But then there are other things that enable global collaboration one scale out. And so, and that for me is like when you want to get really down to the technical nitty-gritties of a world that is living through the collapse of a system no longer fit for purpose or never fit for purpose, that was just bleeding the capital rather than live off the interest. We need to refit the human presence back into the bioregions that fundamentally give us the core benefits that we can live off. And we and so for me, we need to really carefully look at what technological and global, like that conversation that you're putting, it's basically, it's a big spectrum, and we both have a spotlight, and I'm shining that way and you're shining that way, but it's the same spectrum. So what I think we need to do, shining it on the global thing, is to have that conversation of what are the enabling technologies that we need some form of mining for, some form of energy for, would enable people to live a neo-ruralist future within bioregions that is much more traditional again, but has high tech and enables us to still keep learning and all of that. Because that level of technology and energy and material use, we could probably just about wing for 8 or 9 billion people. But right now we're trying to create ubiquitous technology for 8 or 9 billion people, and most of it technology we don't even need, that forces us into life patterns that we don't even want. And so it's the danger when you're in environments like Planet Local, where we met recently in Bristol, is that it can become a bit sort of, oh, it's all coming back to the like self-sufficiency at the local community scale. And we need something in between. We need that wise, like, what are the enabling technologies that would allow us to meet most of our need, 80% of our needs, within a regional production for regional consumption.
Brilliant.
And that needs global networks, and that needs an ecological civilization ultimately. But because we're in the middle of collapse, I think that in terms of a linguistic framing of it all, it's more supporting to create systems resilience, to highlight that we need to strengthen cultures in place.
I love that, Daniel. Love how you're explaining the nuance around that. And I'd love to add just a couple of things to that. But let me just give a heads up to people that at this time, if you want to join in the conversation, I invite you to just raise your Zoom hand. I think you go to just reactions right at the bottom and then raise hand. And love to really begin to open this out so we can all join together. And if you want to share something, either a question or a point, but you're a little uncomfortable about being sort of public about it, do put it in the chat and we'll try to capture it and bring it in. I can't guarantee, it'll depend on how many how many hands raised and where we go. So, but the one thing I just wanted to add to what you're saying, and I loved how you were just describing that the nuance there, is to me is this core concept, which I think is fundamental to the vision of an ecological civilization, of subsidiarity, essentially like pushing to the lowest level possible empowerment. And so if you can be empowered in just a very small community right there, those decisions should be made there. And to your point, there are some decisions that have to be raised next level up, some all the way to a global level. And what I get most inspired by is the work of Elinor Ostrom, who identified principles of the commons, and then people like David Sloan Wilson, David Bollier, who have written about how those principles can be applied in the modern world at scale, but where it's always built up, like you say, where it's always pushed down to the lowest level possible, but then you build up almost like a step-by-step to that higher level, a polycentric system. And even through trade, there was some great ideas spoken at that conference we were at in Bristol, where we shouldn't just say all globalist trade is necessarily bad, but to your point exactly, where we can develop trade or have technologies to keep us local, that is always better, but then always be open to the possibility of there are some things that are needed at a larger level. So I feel that's a great principle. So thanks for that. That really helps me to feel how we can, our two visions, basically, almost like it's like looking from two different eyes, and you open both eyes and you get a three-dimensional view. So let's turn, I see a number of hands up. I also see, by the way, just to speak to it, that most of the hands are people who seem to be presenting as males rather than females. And I really encourage, we know we live in a patriarchy where men are always encouraged to just have the biggest voice, etc. So I encourage people who identify as women to kind of share in the conversation too, so we get more balance there. But let me turn to Derek, who was the first person in the hand up. Hey there, Derek. And I think you're on mute. You want to try speaking now, maybe?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. Very inspiring conversation this evening. I must say, as I'm in the UK, that this is a more convenient time than the one that your meetings are usually on. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's really in line with what I'm personally committed to. I think, although the world looks very dark at the moment, it's entirely possible that we could have a bright future in front of us. I was very inspired by your book, The Patterning Instinct, a few years ago, and also by your more recent book. And I've written a much more modest book of my own, which is called
Love it.
The Letter from 2100, a possible world for your grandchildren.
Beautiful.
And I think both the title and the subtitle speak for themselves. If we do make it as a human society to the end of this century, we will be living in an entirely different world from anything that we've known for the past 6,000 years. And this is not going to be done piecemeal. It's not going to be done by minor fixes to the present modus operandi of human societies. And we're running into the limits, clearly. There's a lot of talk about global warming, but I think that more fundamentally than that is the fact that the way that the world operates is dependent on fossil fuels, and we will not be able to be consuming fossil fuels at the rate that we have been in the next 2 or 3 decades, much less by the end of the century. And
right.
So what will that mean for us? It means that we have to adjust to that reality. And does it mean that we have to go back to a feudal system or go back to the Stone Age? I would like to think that it would mean that all that is positive with technology is still possible. And I believe that that is possible with the energy flows that are arriving in real time and not squandering in 300 years energy that has flowed in from the sun and been stored. And that
makes sense. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Derek. And I agree with what you're describing there. And I just wanted to say that there are so many people want to join this conversation. I think there's something like 12 Zoom hands up already. So I will encourage everyone to be somewhat concise. I really want it to be a shared conversation, but also if we want to give space to everyone, we'll have to be concise.
Okay, well, that's probably enough for me in that case.
Okay, well, really great to see your voice, and please share that book, links to it on the Deep Transformation Network, so others can discover it. Thank you. And let's turn to Andy. Hey there, Andy.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to comment on Daniel's approach to activism. I think you said, Daniel, that you start the morning by meditating, and then you think, what am I going to give my energy to today? And I was thinking that this whole thing about bringing the future into the present, in other words, actually recognizing that the present is the only time we can really do anything, is a spiritual question, actually. And that it's in the meditation that you connect with something that is beyond the challenges of the present, the collapse that we're living through, and you thereby bring about a space within which a positive future can emerge, which is one of interdependence and relationality between living beings and nature and so forth. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think we met in Bristol. Like your face.
We had a meal together.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know, Daniel, if you want to add anything to that, or you feel that's complete.
No, I think it's a very valid observation that it becomes a spiritual path to enact the future in the present, and it's not always easy, and you can't judge anybody who doesn't manage to do it because of their current life situation. But those of us fortunate enough that can do it have incredible power in actually creating space for others, making it easier for others. If there's anything to Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic resonance work, then any person who creates that space makes it easier for other people to move into that space.
So true, Daniel. And I would actually add, just here on the Deep Transformation Network, there's a lot of sense that when we're talking about deep transformation, it's not just about transformation of society, but it's our own internal deep transformation. And so much work has been focused more and more on what does deep transformation mean for ourselves internally. And I see that, Ray, that you were next on the list and you've been spotlighted, which is great. But I was going to suggest, there was a suggestion in the chat too, just to get a little bit of more of a sense of gender balancing. If we can turn to you, Carmen, first, and then come back to you, Ray. I hope you don't mind.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Daniel and Jeremy, for this beautiful session. So I want to get to the future potential of the present moment as it relates to our behaviors around our own money. How we spend our money or consume it, how we save it, and how are we investing it. That's one piece of the question. And related to that, Daniel, you talked about entrepreneurship. And on the chat, we talked, a couple of people, it's like, yeah, but what do we do with all of these insights, this information, this intelligence to move forward to this new planet that we want to create? And I want you to address the point of what is the role, in your view, of entrepreneurs in the creation of the new planet, and connected to money and how our behaviors around money.
Super. Two really important questions. Like one thing that comes to mind is the work of Michael Schumann, who was also at this conference that Jeremy and I have talked about, with regard to where to put your money. Like he's been for 30 years, 40 years, a promoter of local living economies, like in America, you can look at the Bali network, or not the existing Bali network, but the past of the Bali network, was very much focused on the entrepreneur. For me, there's a huge opportunity as we redesign our presence on Earth within the next 2 or 3 decades. And as we will, because large supply lines are brittle and dangerous, a ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal and things don't arrive, we're already in the beginning of seeing a relocalization and regionalization of production and consumption. And the thing that Jeremy and I already opened up is that it's not going to be as easy as it can, like a slogan, oh, let's just go local. It's much more nuanced than that. Some of it will be hyper local, some of it will be regional, in some cases it will be more national networks of regions to support it. And in other cases, it will have to be global collaboration to enable it. And in each one of those spaces, there's room for entrepreneurs. But the most exciting space for entrepreneurs that creates, to my mind, a clever hedge your bets pathway into an uncertain future is to entrepreneur in your local and regional economy, to build a business where you know that even if you failed with this business, you build so many amazing human relationships that can't be called failure at the end when things get funny. So you pay attention, and this is one of the big difference between regenerative and sustainability. You don't pay attention to the outcome so much. The deliverable is not the object, the final thing that you hand over and get your cash for. The deliverable is the relationships, the knowledge, the capacity, and the capability you're building as you get there. And if you build businesses that do that, whether it's businesses that provide clean local water, clean local food, capacity to house people, capacity to educate people, all of that will be necessary again. And in terms of local investment, I learned this recently from Michael Schumann, is the most powerful investment is to invest in yourself or anywhere else, because that is something, if all else fails and it's all taken away from us, the zero and ones in bank accounts suddenly go to zero, and they say, my grandmother lived to 103. She saw 4 new currencies, and in each case, they gave you 30 or 150 of the new stuff and said, start again. Yeah. We haven't lived through that, and we think that's impossible. My grandmother only died 5 years ago, so she saw 4 of them in her lifetime. Anyway, I could go off in lots of directions. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that really brings us back to what Andy was raising. It's like that spiritual investment. I mean, to take liberty with a metaphor of investment, but yes, is what it's about. So over to you, Ray.
Thanks for the opportunity to
navigate to Dr. Menchel.
I think we need to, okay. Yeah, so
sure. Allergy and asthma care.
As a theoretician, I tend to conceptualize our
In
civilization.
a quarter mile, turn left onto 14th Road.
I'm sorry, somebody needs to mute. Please make sure you're muted if you're not already. Okay, Ray now. But we have to get you off mute now because I think you got muted. Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
It seems we need to conceptualize our civilizational superorganism in terms of biomimicry, for better or worse. Right now, we're emulating bacteria and emphasizing unrestrained growth. And we need to emulate the wisest possible human body, mind, and spirit. It seems we need an expanded fractal biophysics comparable to neoclassical economics, but life-affirming.
Yes.
Is anyone working on this?
Well, for me, that system has already been invented, and we're part of it. And it's called the living conscious biosphere. And so we don't need to invent a new system, but we need to become aware that our system has always just been an epiphenomenon of that system. That the narrative that separates culture and technology in a different category than nature and life is simply a human-made narrative, that the biogeophysical evolving whole that we emerged from contains nuclear bombs, contains nuclear power reactors, and contains trees. And all the elements in it are cycling over long periods of time, even beyond that planet in our solar system and the galaxy. And so the question of creating a regenerative future is coming home to the fact that we can not be masters of, predictors of, controllers of that system. We can ever only aspire to be appropriate participants in it. And it's tough for engineers who've given us so much, who think in that way, to realize that, because we've been promised that we can sort of engineer our way out of any kind of biological inconvenience, but life will show us otherwise.
And if I could add one thing to that, it's this sense of that there is a way in which nature, in which biomimicry works, which is looking at the fundamental principle of mutually beneficial symbiosis. And to my way of thinking, when I talk about ecological civilization, I'm talking about a civilization that's based on exactly that notion of mutually beneficial symbiosis between humans and other humans, between humans and non-human nature, leading to, I saw in the chat, somebody mentioned this concept of Glenn Albrecht, an eco philosopher from Australia, of the symbiocene, that's where we could actually have the potential to transform to on that basis. So thanks for that great point, Ray. And to you, Donna, hi there.
Hi, good to see you both. Good to touch down here. I shall try to be brief. There's several threads going through my mind. It's speaking about living into this future now has been a really powerful way, I think, for us all to learn. And one of the things, and perhaps it's not a surprise, I bring it up often, is the reality of this being such a humbling learning journey for all of us. Mm-hmm. And the different ways that we describe and embody and get onto this journey. One of the things I'm really valuing in the recent year or so, is the extent to which there's more collaboration amongst all of you that are doing this work, and all of us, which I think is so very important. The I don't know-ness, the uncertainty, the embracing that as being so important and so hard for people, for the very reasons you've just described, that we've lived into a world that expects answers and that expects expertise and expects all this linear, boxed in, compartmentalized way of packaging and expressing stuff. So I'm underscoring that, in terms of the things that we're describing here, because I think, and you might have heard me describe this, it's the messy humanness. It's the human system stuff that we trip over the most at some level. We're all messy humans. We all have our stuff. And it doesn't matter how evolved any of us are around our consciousness, it's never done. It's never done. So I'll just leave it at, there's a lot of other things. I want to make space for others, but I bring it up because so many of the people that are on the path, zooming in, zooming out around their own personal development, some of those folks think they've got it all figured out and they've done my shit, And so I think it's so important to raise that one. Thanks for what you're doing, guys.
Donna, lovely to see you. And maybe what helped me to make peace with that dynamic you just spoke about is that there's sort of phases. Like if you spend too much time in that self-confidence of I've done that stuff, I've been there, and now I can move on and do other stuff, then life just smashes you right into the puddle and says, whoops, no, go back to square one and start again. But there's also sometimes like for the kind of really unraveling the deeper personal levels of masks in front of ourselves, sometimes you're not in the life phase to be able to open that box. And then you just have to wait for a few years and deal with the consequences of it. But yeah, I think, and for me, that it's more and more like this unknowing that you rightfully always foreground is something that is hugely important in all of this, because particularly because there's likely to be such fundamental disruption of the status quo. The more we as individuals, as families, as communities, and as larger collectives are capable to be stopped into a fundamental not knowing situation and say, okay, cool, this is life. We've been here before. We know how to do this. It's going to be tough, but calm down. That's really a really important skill to have in these times ahead of us.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's what education teaches us. And a similar thing, like just to briefly weave that in, I love the word subsidiarity, Jeremy, as you know, and it's key to all of this nested scale linking thinking. But in these circles of personal development and collective development and collective consciousness and stuff, there is a tendency to move into from the pyramid to the pancake, and let's just have it all come out of the collective.
Yeah.
And if we don't face up to the fact that just as with AI, bullshit in equals bullshit out, after 200 years of mechanistic, reductionist, siloed education that was to make us better workers in a machinery, to just assume that in any community you can just pass it into the round and say, what kind of regenerative culture do you want to create? Might not be quite as simple as that. I think we need to relearn in all that unknowing, deeper ways of being that luckily every place holds for us, every culture holds for us if we find patterns of digging deeper. So thanks for bringing that in, Donna, and for inspiring us.
That's great. And thanks, Donna. And just before we turn to you, Bob, I just wanted to bring in a couple of questions from the chat that actually bring in other voices or groups of voices that need to be heard in this conversation. So just really quickly from Sarah Spencer, she wrote earlier, so far this discussion has been very human-centered. How can we increase the agency of other living beings in these and other conversations? So that's one question. And the other from Joe Turner, that he says, it strikes me a lot of the ideas being discussed today have been embraced by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. And how are we working with learning from indigenous peoples' cultures and knowledge? So before we turn to you, Bob, I don't know, Daniel, if you wanted to add just a couple of comments on those two important perspectives.
Interesting that it can seem that way. I think what we're trying to talk about is not human-centered, but kin-centric way of redesigning our human affairs, because from a kin-centric perspective, we're the ones who've messed up. We're the ones who are not fitting in. We're the ones who are transgressing our rightful place in the web of life. And so that's why so much of the change needs to be on the human side. But for me, the fundamental kind of, was it an enlightenment detour? I don't know. But this separation away from the living world and this whole conversation of mastery over the living world. So basically the move away from a kin-centric life as a community in which we're members and needed members, not cancers to the planet. That's the other bit that we now say so much. Humans are just a cancer to the planet. We just need to be gone. No, we're not. We're a keystone species who can create more abundance. And I think we knew that when we lived in a kin-centric worldview.
Lovely. Thank you. That's a great paradigm shift there, right there. Thank you. So turn to you, Bob, and just looking at the time and so many hands up, let's try to keep really focused on the questions.
Okay, yes, thank you. I'm interested in the role of fear And I think fear has played a huge role in how humans have messed up if you look back through history. And I'm particularly interested in a concept I call fear-based thinking, where here fear becomes a habit in how we see ourselves, each other, and the world. And what it does is it creates it makes us self-centered. It creates a scarcity mindset, an adversarial mindset. It narrows and fragments our thinking, basically undermines all that we need to do to embrace the systems of the world. And I think what's happened is we've created frames through fear, and much of this is done intentionally through politics and media because fear is the best way to get and keep our attention. But we've created frames that don't overlap, and that creates a solid base of support. And what we need to do is to let go of fear and create an opening where we can understand each other and work together and transform fear into caution, care, curiosity, and concern.
Beautiful. Thank you. Both. Love that insight. Thank you so much for sharing that. And to Roberta. Roberta, you want to share?
Yeah. Sorry about that. I couldn't find my button. I'm in the car, so I'm not driving. First of all, I just have to gush for 1 second because I can't believe I'm in conversation with two of my very favorite thinkers, and so I just want to mark that moment. So thank you for taking my hand. And I wanted to say that I'm part of Joe Brewer's Design School for Regenerating Earth, where we're putting into practice the very kinds of things that you've been talking about. And I just want to use as an example here in the Acadian bioregion, the northeastern part of the North American continent, where we have not really been organized across the landscape bioregionally, but we've started that process greatly through my participation in the school. And we are doing the linkage across all scales where we're working locally. Like just last Saturday, we had a repair cafe. That was an amazing community event, all the way to working with our collaborative partners across the bioregion to develop geospatial as well as network mapping system, and that's using the appropriate technology to strengthen our bonds across the bioregion.
That's
and
great.
at the design school,
just to focus, do you have a question for Daniel?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that the design school is just about to launch a new learning journey
of going from all was in 6.
Sorry. Regarding ecological, basically, bioregional learning ecosystems. So I think it's going to be an amazing opportunity, and people are going to be involved from all over the world. So
That's
it's
great.
a way to actually put this stuff into action. I just wanted to put a plug into that. But thank you both so much for your inspiring work. Yeah.
Perhaps, Roberta, if you can put a link to what you're doing
Turn
in the
left
chat,
onto
so people can follow up,
198th
that would be
Street.
perfect.
Then your destination will be on the left. I will do.
Let's turn to Anton. We do seem to get
shout out to Joe Brewer and his work. It's wonderful that he's pulling that together. For me, I mean, it briefly it addresses a similar dynamic that we've had with ecological civilization versus. I find what we really need to pay our attention to is to our bioregion in our bioregion, and as long as Joe is activating people in their place to spend 80-90% of their time focused on local and regional relationships rather than online relationships in a learning school that just talks about what we need to do in a local region. I'm doing similar work here in this local region. There are people all over the world working in their bioregions, and we do need to link them up. And it's wonderful that there's this network that is getting people linked up.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Roberta. Hey there, Anton. You want to, and let's just try to be concise, obviously, for time.
Okay, I would like to kind of point out that we just, as humans, we just didn't sort of emerge upon the earth. We've had civilizations for thousands and thousands of years, and there's been a trajectory of civilizations. There's a book by Lewis Morgan that actually was created, the inspiration for Karl Marx, also created the inspiration in China for Mao and all these other folks. But he traces us from savagery through barbarism through civilization. So I think it's important to decide what exactly kind of civilization are we talking about in terms of state and property, and how we're going to deal with families and the power structures within. He also wrote another book called The League of the Iroquois, which provides an in-depth view of indigenous power structures, how the society was organized to control power and to deal with conflict, and was organized around peace rather than war. And so I'd like both of you, if you could, to comment on the assertion that we don't, as humans, we're following a trajectory of development, and over the past thousands and thousands of years, are we being held by this trajectory, or can we actually break free from what has transpired in the past to do something new?
Great, thanks. And Anton, if you could put the links to those books in the chat, that would be great. Thanks. But Daniel, what do you think on that?
For quite some time, I bought into that whole developmental trajectory thinking, and I still am to some extent, but I'm also starting to just let in the not knowing, let in the questioning of it, because there's something, like, you could even say that, what is the notion of civilization? The notion of civilization is a clever oppressor meme, to be radical. It's a clever meme that creates a larger us and an ideal that never has been, because none of those civilizations have been civil. And our civilization is not civil. It's as farcical as that America is the defender of democracy on the planet, to talk about civilization. Didn't want to go there because I didn't want to bomb me civilization meme. But you asked.
This is what this is about, is having these different perspectives. And I'm glad you raised that, Daniel. We're coming towards the end, but it is a key question, and we need to recognize that there has never been a civilization up to this moment that has not been extractive, exploitative, and destructive of others, elites oriented, and so it would be a total transformation of the very word if we got there.
And I'm much more with, and you brought the other end of the spectrum. The Iroquois nation piece that you brought in is the other end of the spectrum. That's the subsidiarity-based way of organizing that is about place-sourced regenerative cultures in place, re-inhabiting the earth within their bioregions as gardeners of abundance. So yeah, that's
thanks there. And hey, Fran, great to see you. Welcome to our community right now.
Thank you. So I've appreciated this conversation a lot, and thank you both for it. I wanted to bring in the idea of the Earth Charter, and I don't know, Daniel, if that's something you're familiar with.
Very much so.
Okay, great, because I want to bring it in that this was a process developed over many years and consultation with thousands of people to develop the kind of components of the future that we want. So when we talk about something as big as ecological civilization, we have the question of what does it mean? And one place to turn is indeed to the Earth Charter, because it spells out these many components that people have agreed upon. So I just want to bring that in for the group, because it helps us fill in what we're talking about. And so I thank you for this little moment to come.
That's great.
Thank you for bringing up the Earth Charter. Like I am very familiar with it. I'm a strong supporter of it. I've had long conversations with Fritjof Capra and what's her name, Vieira, the lady who's running the Miriam, yeah. And I actually, it's almost like I want to share this little vignette, although we're running out of time, because it shows how time goes on. In 1999, 2000, I was living in southern Spain and dreaming the hippie dream of creating an eco-village with my friends that was going to be an environmental education center. And one of the guys in the valley we were living in, which was in the Alpujarras in southern Spain, was asking me, we need to get the people behind the Earth Charter. And because it was just, I don't know, it was 2002, it was after the 2000 and the beginning of the new millennium. And he said, we need to rally the leaders of the world to say the true beginning of the new millennium is not from 1999 to 2000, but 2001. And we messed it up in 2000. We just had a big fireworks and partied and were worried about the K1 bug or whatever that would stop our computers. And he was trying to get people to endorse the Earth Charter as a nationally endorsed UN document through this is where it's dated, through a postcard campaign. So we actually printed 50,000 postcards and searched for addresses of political leaders to send these postcards to get them to endorse the Earth Charter. And this is 24 years ago. So yes.
That is incredible story, Daniel. And Fran, I want to thank you for raising that. And in fact, I'm excited to just share with you that in fact, our next live monthly meeting is going to be held on Tuesday, January 9th on the topic of the Earth Charter. And we're actually going to be joined by Miriam Villela, the Executive Director of Earth Charter International, and Mary Evelyn Tucker, who is involved in helping to create it, who can actually share us some of that origin story. So I'm really looking forward to, so everybody who's here today, tune in. It's not the first Tuesday of the month, which usually is held, but that's the 2nd of January. So just so everyone knows, it's going to be the second Tuesday, the 9th of January. So I see we kind of have run out of time. So just a couple of things. Let's turn to you, Kevin, for a final question. To Remedios and Faye and Shando, Margaret, what I'd invite you to do is either put the question you'd like to ask in the chat or later on, I'll be uploading the video. We'll upload the video onto the DTN, and you can put that question in the comments. And I'll ask Danielle if you be prepared to maybe look at whatever it is you wanted to share, so the conversation can be ongoing. So even though the live version is coming to an end right now, let's keep it ongoing on the DTN. But just to turn to you, Kevin, for a final. If you could just once again be concise.
And thank you both for a great conversation. And I think the conversation sort of collapsed the dichotomy you presented at the beginning between eco-civilization and regenerative civilizations. Regeneration is a feature of ecosystems. So, I mean, they go hand in hand. But my question is, you brought up a term back, 30 minutes ago that really struck me. I've been holding that ever since, about neo-rural type of human habitation, which you implied would be more rural settings, supplemented by technology that we have now. My question was, that sounds very idyllic and very wonderful, but I was wondering if spreading out human populations would put more strain on ecosystems that are already under strains, especially considering that the projections are there'll be less and less livable land as we move through the 21st century. As Gaia Vince wrote in her book about Nomad Century. So anyways, I just wanted to see what your vision of that was and hear what you had to say about what the possibilities of that particular model are.
You're very astute. You're a very astute listener, because that was a sort of, I was fumbling for the right term, and I just sort of heard myself use that term, and then I realized how loaded it was, and you picked up on it. I don't mean to create some sort of image of we're all living in a John Jevons kind of self-sufficiency little 1 acre plot and all of that. But I do think that when neo-rural is maybe not that bad of a term, because part of what you see in America at the moment is the disenfranchisement of the rural in a country that for the world is basically 5 or 6 big cities. Like when anybody outside of America thinks of America, we think of a few cities, but we don't really think of the majority of the country. And And I think that as we re-inhabit our bioregions, we need to precisely look at the relationship between the urban centers and the bioregions that they're naturally nested in, watershed by watershed, to just give us a place to start. And begin to detangle the global addictions and dependencies of those like global cities. And just as Jeremy was speaking to, like, rather than go from a collapse and rebuild, which would be just disastrous, is how do we weave our communities in urban centers back into our ruralities in a way that we don't call rural people primitive just because they live in rural environments. And that's precisely where we might also be able to, we're still having all these conversations in silos, the future of work, the future of the environment, the future of the economy. And maybe all of this needs to be redesigned together, which would mean that people in the city engage in community-supported agriculture on the land surrounding the city, that farmers that are not just producers of agricultural commodities, but custodians of healthy ecosystems and landscapes, are valued by urban dwellers as doing that. And so for me, what I maybe meant when I used that loaded term neo-rural is that I think we're a bit blinded when we just follow these statistics like by 2040 more than 50% of humanity will live in cities, and by 2050 these are all just predictions, and they're not really like the reality is that even today more than half of the world's food is produced by smallholder farmers, most of them women who are working 1 or 2 acres, and that is the remnant of a pattern of inhabitation that has actually stood as well as a species for millennia. And we've eroded that pattern, but we need to recreate it. Not as a back to the golden past, but forward to a regenerative future.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. And I would just add that this is where it's so important to look at technology, not as something to reject, but as something to ask a different question about. How can technology be in the service of bioregionalism, be in the service of life, and begin to look at how we can organize things in that different way? So
Jeremy, briefly, can I bomb your process? I just noticed we did have more men than women, and there's Fei Lu and Remedios up. Shall we just do?
Yeah, let's do this.
7 minutes.
Yeah, maybe Fei, if we could spotlight all of Fei and Remedios and Shando, just so you're spotlighted. And we have to actually really keep a limit on time, because before we turn to you, I just want to make sure everyone's aware. Actually, in just a few minutes from now, there's another event on the Deep Transformation Network, which I want to make sure people can transfer to, because people are prepared for that. At the Artists and Creatives Group, a conversation led by Christopher Losa about working as artists navigating towards a post-colonial, post-industrial, post-consumerist future. So very relevant to this conversation. So I want to make sure we don't intervene, overlap on that. So stay tuned for that. But if you could maybe, Fei, Remedios, and Shando, because we don't have the time for a full question, if you could just give a word or a phrase that we can at least hear your voice in this conversation before we all close. So just encourage that. But really just a word or a phrase, just so your presence is felt with us right now.
Thank you. The whole idea of being told, you can't turn progress backwards, or you can't go back, I think is a horrible thing that's been embedded in people's minds, because I think progress today is looking back, turning back, remembering how we used animals, remembering how we worked together as communities for barn raising, and we had relationships. And I think progress today is turning back to the past and turning things back to what we've done before, what Indigenous people know, and what is possible as humans. Let's empower our human power, be physically involved, have physical, strong bodies, because we're actually working them. We're actually doing work. And and tech is great, but I think it's not the solution. It's part of a piece of a tool we can use, but our own bodies and our relationships is something that we need to really focus on using.
That's great. Thank you, Remedios. That's great. And Faye and Shando, again, like just a word or a phrase, if possible, just to share.
Thank you. My question was, how can, as we talk about ecological civilization, how would that discussion look like in an underdeveloped country? And how can the discussion be inclusive of those from different ideologies, such as China, Middle East, or Central Asian countries?
Now we're starting. Now that's a question to have another 90 minutes.
Exactly. That's a whole hour and a half to discuss that. But absolutely great that you bring that in. Thank you, Faye. And Shando?
Hi there. I just wanted to draw attention to, I've recently been spending a lot of time on Native American websites. And for me, there's just really beautiful examples of how to make communities work. And so I would encourage everybody to spend time on a few Native American websites and then learn stuff from there and bring that back into your bioregion and into your community.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One place to start is the website of Lila June, and everything that she's connected with is really inspiring.
Beautiful. And I just want to give my deep, deep thanks to you, Daniel, and most importantly, to everybody who's been part of this conversation, listening, sharing things in the chat, sharing the ideas. This, to me, feels like, Daniel, you were saying earlier about living into that emerging future, that Otto Scharmer phrase. It feels like this is what we've been doing, sharing, caring, and co-generating together. So it's been a very, very special session. Thank you, Daniel, from my heart.
Let me maybe just say one more thing that is really important there. For me, one of the core insights since I wrote my book is that it is a misunderstanding when we talk about regenerative cultures as something that is going to happen sometime in the future that we don't have yet. We have to see regenerative cultures as the embers that are there in every place that just need a little bit of oxygen so they can create a fire again. And these embers are people who care, love, regenerate, heal, simply, whether it's social, ecological, or economic relationships within that place, living in right relationship, to bring in yet another indigenous frame. That's really what, for me, regenerative cultures is about. And that's what the enacting the future in the present moment is about. And I think we're all doing it. And it's so exciting we've been up to 240 people on this call. And I'm noticing, just quickly skipped through the different screens, that we could be younger. So how do we get more younger folks in this conversation? But thank you so much. What a wonderful community you co-create with wonderful people, and always happy to come back at any point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing your wisdom with all of us here today, and look forward to more.
Great.
Okay. See you all on January 9th at the Earth Charter. Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thank you.